As a feminist killjoy, the media surrounding Alex Honnold is constantly excruciating because all I see and hear is Himpathy. Hi, I'm Erin Monahan. I'm the founder of Terra Incognita Media, a feminist response to the outdoor industry, and I dissect and deconstruct toxic masculinity and how it shows up in the outdoor industry and the world at large. And I'm a particular fan of dissecting Alex Honnold's behavior and the media that surrounds him and the goo goo gaga effect that he has over the entire outdoor industry and beyond. I'm also wearing my very appropriate choice of shirt for today's discussion. The mountains are calling and they said, go to therapy. Yeah, it is a Terra Incognita Media original, and one day I will put them on sale if you want to purchase one. Let me know in the comments if you're interested, or DM me and I'll figure that out in the future. So for a little context, the piece of media that I am using today to critique Alex Honnold and the ways in which Himpathy shows up in him, in the media around him, but also in his relationship with Sanni McCandless, his wife, is that he did an interview for the podcast Diary of a CEO. And McCandless submitted a letter to Stephen Bartlett, the guy who hosts the podcast, to read to Alex Honnold live in this interview. And in the letter, she writes about how he told her once that, quote, everyone wants to believe that I'm burying all these things, these feelings deep inside, but I'm just not, end quote. And then she goes on to talk about how he's basically just this person who is the way he is, and that, quote, filling the space that would normally be taken up by all these feelings is the ability to truly see things. You move through the world like a hawk, while the rest of us are lost in thought. As a climber, you can see the way up a rock face, the climbability of a building, or the layered history of a mountain range. As a father, you notice the quiet intrinsic desires of your daughters or the chores that need doing around the house. And as a friend, you see the raw potential in every person that you meet, end quote. And like, yeah, that's all beautiful, but this letter takes him off the hook of the ways in which he presents as really toxic masculine and the ways in which he treated her like shit in Free Solo, and the ways in which she has had to compromise so much of herself and censor herself, and decided that after Free Solo, basically, I'm assuming, and what we've seen now, is that she's had to turn off her real authentic feelings when it comes to his desire to Free Solo. He has chosen to really not do much differently having kids, and the interviews that he's done reveals this. It's just really easy to listen to this letter and to listen to this interview and be like, yeah, maybe we are just looking into things too deeply. And like, obviously Sonny's the expert of their relationship and Alex is too. And like, if they say it's great and if they don't think that there's anything wrong or toxic about it, then we should just believe them. But that's not how it works. Like, we are allowed to look at something and be critical about it, and like the media around their relationship, and also like just the way that a lot can be revealed by viewing the way these two people who know that their lives are very much in the spotlight because this is what they've chosen. This is how Alex makes his money. This is how he supports his family. We can actually deduce a lot from this, because if it was a priority for him or her to like be in an egalitarian relationship, there would be more discussion about that. But it is so obviously not egalitarian. Like, the power dynamic does bend towards Alex's will, because in order for him to be doing these big feats and going on these expeditions, that requires Sanni to stay at home with the kids. That requires her to do most of the parenting. And when we know that we live in a society that already puts that on women, it's pretty clear that Alex is not doing much to unlearn his conditioning under whites' heteropatriarchy. Otherwise, he would be making much different decisions and would be speaking in a much different way in these interviews and saying much different things. But instead, every interview just reveals more and more evidence as to how he has narcissistic tendencies, is toxic masculine, and is absolutely indoctrinated into white supremacist patriarchy and not doing much about it. And his family, his children, are bearing the burden of that. But so let's get back to what we were discussing. I want to discuss the media literacy that we need to have as feminist killjoys around what we're seeing when it comes to Alex Honnold, because he's just the greatest example of toxic masculinity and himpathy that I see right now in the outdoor industry. This kind of himpathy and the media surrounding him is not okay, and it perpetuates this myth that men just need our endless unconditional love. The fact that Sanni is writing this letter to him and that in the comments, like under this video, it's all of this like, wow, like glorifying their love and glorifying Sanni's commitment and aggrandizing Alex Honnold and excusing the way that in which he actually needs to be held accountable for the awful treatment that we have seen him give Sanni. It perpetuates this myth that men just need our endless unconditional love and understanding for their lack of emotionality and lack of emotional intelligence. I can't say what actually is happening in their relationship behind closed doors, obviously, but I'm encouraging us to be critical of this media and how it is portrayed to us. Again, this is media literacy that we need to have, especially as feminist killjoys, because we are indoctrinated into these systems too, and I want better for us. I want us to be in better relationships, especially for my straight women out there. I am thankfully bisexual, but that does not mean that sometimes I don't get got by patriarchy and white supremacy. I too have been in relationships with men who are absolutely toxic masculine and are not doing jack shit to unlearn their conditioning under these oppressive systems. I pray for me, I pray for all of us. So the media surrounding Alex and his brand, if you will, is all about him being this brooding genius. First, with Free Solo, he was portrayed as being so invested, so determined and locked in that Sanni was a distraction, that she wasn't understanding enough. She was too emotional. And there was this implied or even explicit fear that he would get distracted and soft by her presence, and that a relationship and the presence of specifically this woman and her feelings would get in the way of his goals, his ambition, his motivations, his greatness, and his true expression of his masculinity, his manliness, essentially, because women should just get out of the way and not be seen or heard or have any needs, because women are just so needy. So we need to become the perfect wife, the perfect girlfriend, and just become the embodiment of the cool girl trope, which I know we all know very well, and that we have tried to perform. At least I can bet money that any of us who've been indoctrinated into patriarchy have been brainwashed into attempting to perform the cool girl so that we could be adored, be liked, be validated by men, be chosen by men. And it is something that I've had to unlearn and still have to work against at times, because white supremacist patriarchy is a hell of a drug. I know that me and my dear friends and the majority of women out there have all suffered under trying to perform the cool girl trope. And where has that gotten us? Miserable, silenced, censored, isolated, alone but coupled. I've never felt more alone than when I'm in a relationship with a man. As much as people want to believe it, Alex Honnold doesn't exist in a vacuum. Men need to actively work towards unlearning their conditioning under whites' heteropatriarchy. You can't separate his difficulty and aversion to feelings from him being a cis white man inside of white supremacist patriarchy. We also can't diagnose him as autistic, like many people jump to in the comments whenever I post about Alex Honnold, because he hasn't confirmed this. And even if he was autistic, this isn't a get out of patriarchy free card. Not only is this an actually ableist take, because autistic people are not devoid of emotions and are not exempt from being able to develop emotional maturity, I know lots of men with autism who willingly admit that they're still conditioned by the patriarchy, still conditioned by white supremacy, and need to work on unlearning it. Having autism does not make you allergic to being accountable for how you hold power and privilege in the world and how you might be abusing that power and privilege in the world, which is something that anyone with power and privilege is going to do if you're not actively working against it and working to unlearn it. That goes for me too, as somebody who has white privilege and who walks through the world with a lot of power as a cis white woman. Inside of systems of oppression, it's kind of a chicken or egg scenario that is impossible to answer. Would Alex feel this way, this aversion to confronting difficult emotions, if we didn't live in systems of oppression that conditioned him to avoid his emotions as a man, where his mom basically trained him to cry on the inside like a winner, where men are validated and praised for being emotionless, for not crying, where being a strong man means not showing any sign of sadness, fear, anxiety, uncertainty. It's a moot question. We live in systems of oppression, and it's without a doubt that no man is untouched by white supremacist patriarchal conditioning, and Alex Honnold is not exempt. It's unequivocally a product of patriarchy that Honnold gets squirmy around his and others' feelings. To say that he's just different is to completely ignore the reality and the context that we live in a society that indoctrinates men into having this exact relationship to feelings. And this is what we as women will accept or are trained and conditioned to accept in heterosexual relationships, because society has conditioned us to expect so little from men, to have himpathy for them. Himpathy is a term that was coined by philosopher and writer Kate Manne, and she wrote about this in her book Down Girl: The Logic of Misogyny, published in 2017. It refers to the disproportionate and inappropriate sympathy often offered to male perpetrators of misogynistic behavior, such as sexual assault or harassment, over their victims. So himpathy centers men when we should be centering the women who are victimized and are the survivors of their violence or their toxic behavior. And so we see examples of himpathy all the time in our society. And I see this so strongly when it comes to the media surrounding Alex Honnold. And I see Sanni extending himpathy to him constantly. And I know that when a lot of us watched Free Solo for the first time, we were really resonating with Sanni, because we've all been there. We've all dated that toxic masculine eco jock climber bro who prioritizes himself and his ambitions and his goals over being in a relationship, but still wants to be in the relationship, still wants to have his cake and eat it too. When being in an intimate partnership, being in a relationship, and receiving love and care from someone requires you to reciprocate. But men are conditioned to be individualistic, selfish egomaniacs. And I would even argue that there are hints of some narcissistic tendencies in Alex Honnold, but that's for another video. Basically, what's happening in the media surrounding Alex Honnold, and that has been going on for ever since he became a media sensation, and particularly in this, in all of his interviews, basically. And Sanni kind of feeds into this as well, unintentionally or not, is there's this like chalking it up to like men are from Mars, women are from Venus mentality. Like Alex is just built differently, and this is just how women are. They're just more feeling. And it is, I'm sure, incredibly unintentional, but that is what's happening. And there is this double standard, because when women have an aversion or difficulty with emotions, they're seen as cold, as bitchy. But Alex Honnold gets to be seen as calculated, logical, wise, rational. If it was a woman, there would be something wrong with him. But there is all this backlash when people talk about the concern that they have around these obviously red flag behaviors that Alex Honnold exhibits. Anyone with a level of emotional maturity would see these red flags in him and be like, this is concerning. Again, the mountains are calling, and they said go to therapy, not let's push for the next adrenaline rush because that's how we've chosen to cope with our unhealed trauma. Alex Honnold's inner child is screaming, and he is really good at repressing those screams. After all this time and being the ripe age of 40 that Honnold is, it is a huge red flag that he still admits to having difficulty with his emotions without naming that he has been indoctrinated into white supremacist patriarchy. It's not just who he is, and it's dangerous to be lulled into this easy, convenient, simple explanation completely devoid of how his identities impact who he is as a person. I have had to ask myself, am I a naturally empathic person? Am I a naturally sensitive, feeling, intuitive, attuned person to others' experiences? Or is that because I grew up with a hyper anxious mom and grew up in the family system that I grew up in, where I had to be hyper aware of my mom's feelings so that I could avoid her getting mad at me, because I had to walk on eggshells around her very haywire emotional landscape. And because I'm a woman in the world who is conditioned to be the caretaker, to be the one who is sensitive to other people's experiences, because women are trained and conditioned to be the caretakers. Therapy and anti-racist study has taught me that empathy and compassion are learned skills. And in a white supremacist society, white people are conditioned to be individualistic. So yeah, even though as a woman, I was conditioned to be more hyper aware of other people's emotional needs, I'm also a white person who was conditioned to be individualistic, to be entitled to spaces, and to be entitled to a certain comfort level. And so I've had to really unlearn that and heal from that and work that into my everyday life and work anti-racist practice into my everyday life so that I can check that white supremacist impulse to prioritize my comfort over being uncomfortable and not stray away from the realities of the world that make me want to look the other way because it's more convenient, it's more comfortable. And as a white person, I could curate my life in a way where I don't have to think about anybody's experience that isn't mine, that isn't a white woman's experience. But that is part of being an emotionally mature person and a responsible contributor to a better society. And if I truly am about my values that say that I do want collective liberation for all, and I do believe that all humans deserve equitable rights and deserve to thrive and be their fullest expression of themselves, and I do want a just and fair world where everyone experiences freedom and there isn't genocide and there isn't enslavement and there isn't racism or white supremacy or transphobia, then I do need to be actively working on these things every single day and checking my indoctrination into these systems of oppression and being accountable to the ways in which I have power and privilege in the world so that I don't unintentionally abuse that power and privilege and actually use it for good. But Alex Honnold isn't asking himself these questions. He's not thinking about these things because otherwise it would be revealed to us in his interviews. It would be revealed to us in who he is as a person. There's been enough content and enough interviews that he's been in to give us give us a pretty good understanding of who he is as a person. Of course, we can never truly know because we're not behind the scenes with him, but from all the media that he puts out, if these things were important to him, if questioning his role in patriarchy and his role in white supremacy was actually important to him, we would have heard it by now. In conclusion, Sanni's letter to Alex is basically letting him off the hook for the ways in which his behavior stems from the fact, in part, largely in part, due to, like largely in part, because he is a man, because he is a white man, because he is a cis white man inside a system that prioritizes his experience, his needs, his wants, his goals, his feelings, his comfort over everyone else's. It's a huge red flag that at 40 years old, and after all this time to reflect, and after all of this criticism has come out about him that I think would be hard for him to miss, even if his friends showed it to him as like a ha, look at this like feminist, crazy feminist criticizing you and your behavior in Free Solo. Like any self-reflecting, introspective, emotionally mature person would think to themselves, yeah, Maybe I was an asshole to Sanni in that movie. But that's not who he is because it's normalized in their relationship. It's normalized in his behavior and in our society to expect men to act like this. Honnold was a red flag then, he's a red flag now. He doubles down in his interviews, basically saying, this is just how I am and I can't change. And this is just me, naturally, in my natural state. So I don't need to work on myself. I don't need to self reflect. He hasn't expressed any regret or expressed that he's worked on himself to develop greater emotional intelligence. He keeps this narrative that he's just not that deep, which, whether he intends it or not, reinforces the narrative that men can't be held accountable for their emotionally immature behavior because it's just simply who they are, how God made them. It's just natural. That is the implication here. That is what is implied when he is acting like this, when he describes his behavior in this way. And when Sanni writes a letter like that to him to be read out loud on a public podcast, a very popular podcast. We, unfortunately, as women, subconsciously have been conditioned to believe this about men, that the bar is just so low that we can't really expect anything more from them. And this is why we keep going back to emotionally unavailable men, because we are conditioned to believe that we can fix them, or that it's our job to fix them, and that it's our job to be the man's caretaker, but also the man's therapist and also his mother, etc. We don't do this consciously. Of course not. I mean, like I said, like all of my previous relationships have been in one way or another not healthy, and where I have fallen into, unfortunately, a dynamic that was incredibly patriarchal. It's just so ingrained in heterosexuality that it happens even to the fiercest feminist among us, like myself. Yes, I have struggled with this every single time I've dated a man. And it's not just who they are. We cannot chalk up their behavior to just being, well, that's just how men are. That's bullshit. And it's dangerous to be lulled into this easy, convenient, simplistic explanation that is completely devoid of how men's identities impact who they are as a person and how they've been conditioned in the world. Conditioning is not natural. These systems of oppression that we live in are not natural. There is nothing natural and nothing human about it. White supremacy and patriarchy dehumanize us. They dehumanize all of us, these systems. So it is really important that we work every day on humanizing ourselves, and that work looks differently depending on what your identities are. But obviously Alex Honnold isn't doing that. I would bet bajillions of dollars on him not doing that work actively. Because otherwise his responses in these interviews would be very, very different. Especially in a climate where the manosphere is a thing and where men are told that they have to show up as the dominant, warrior-like, stoic, unfeeling ones, and women as the subservient, submissive, doting ones. This narrative is dangerous. The media and the framing of who Alex Honnold is and his relationship to Sanni, their relationship together and how it's portrayed, is dangerous. And I know that their politics might be liberal, but there is such a trad wife dynamic between them that it is incredibly unsettling. Just like Therapy Jeff on TikTok has talked about in one of his videos, in egalitarian relationships, you get to show up as your messy, full, complicated, sometimes confused, sometimes flawed self. Whether or not they intend this, their relationship is marketed and portrayed within a hierarchy. Power goes from Alex to Sanni. Their relationship is not portrayed as egalitarian at all. And again, while I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, that is not what it looks like on screen and in these interviews. It's not what it sounds like. It's not what it looks like. To be in an egalitarian relationship with a cis white man is a feat, okay? That man needs to be doing constant self-work, constant healing, and self-interrogation and deconstructing of his allegiance to white cis hetero patriarchy. That's the bare minimum. Right, Miki? My friend's dog says yes. That's the bare minimum. Honnold, whether he likes it or not, is propaganda for the manosphere. He has made himself the poster boy of vulnerability equals weakness. Again, whether he likes it or not, whether he's intended it or not. Vulnerability and being comfortable with discomfort, meaning being comfortable with feelings and healthy conflict, is crucial to true intimacy and secure attachment. We never hear Alex talking about these things when his relationship with Sanni is brought up. There's one clip on social media of Honnold and McCandless on a hike, and Honnold asks, "What am I most afraid of?" And McCandless happily promotes this trope of heterosexuality, of her being the emotional, quirky, silly, sort of I love Lucy type, while verbatim saying that Alex is most afraid of her emotions. To say that white cis heteropatriarchy is not influencing this relationship, doesn't have a very strong presence in this relationship, and that white supremacist patriarchy is not a valid conclusion to come to as to why Alex Honnold approaches his relationship to feelings in the way that he does, would be delusional. And I might be delusional about a lot of things, but this is not one of those things. I will always use Alex Honnold as an example because he is so praised and lauded in the outdoor industry and pedestalized. And the himpathy for him is just off the charts. Plus, he was friends with a literal serial rapist, so he will forever and always be on my shit list. Remember that it is always that deep. I'm Erin Monahan. You can follow along at Terra Incognita Media on social media. You can visit terracollective.podia.com to grab the free cheat sheet that I've created called Toxic Masculinity in the Outdoor Industry. I also teach a course called Disrupting Toxic Masculinity in the Outdoor Industry. You can learn more at the same website. You can also visit terraincognitamedia.com to read articles, or if you want to support this feminist killjoy work, you can visit patreon.com/terraincognitamedia and contribute $5 a month. I'm sending you all my feminist killjoy rage and love as always, and I will talk to you next time.